The earlier two lectures, they were trying to analyze, those two lectures, those who have attended those lectures would know, they were trying to analyze and critique the idea of inclusiveness in the very complex Indian cultural context. And today's lecture will extend that discourse a bit into the field of communication to see how and why we must gain a certain intercultural competence in order to communicate effectively in these times. We are very happy that Richard Rice is with us, and we have Professor Sumanyu Satpathy as a chair. Sumanyu Satpathy is Professor of English at the University of Delhi, and his publications include Reading Literary Cultures, Perspectives from Odisha. He has edited Southern Postcolonialism's New Literary Representations and the Global South, and co-edited The Tenth Reza, an anthology of Indian nonsense, as well as Signifying the Self, this another publication. His articles have appeared in the edited volumes such as Children's Literature and the Fear the Civil, and Same-Sex Love in India, as well as journals such as Papers in Language and Literature, English Language Notes, Ariel, Notes and Queries, and Indian Literature. He was a distinguished fellow at the Institute for Advanced Study, La Trobe University, Melbourne. Over to you, Sumanyu.
Thank you, Rizio. Friends, I'm very glad to be here, and one reason why I'm very happy to be here, and I shall soon be introducing my friend Rich Rice. I tend to call him Richie Rich. One reason is that Rizio and LILA generally thought of me. As you can see, if you have looked at the CV of Richard Rice and my the brief note, you can see that there is nothing similar between his preoccupation, his interest, and mine. And his talk seems to be so new, on such a new subject. I'm happy that of all people, Rizio and LILA thought of asking me to chair this session. I was present in one of the talks which was very interesting, and we all enjoyed that talk. I'm sure, though this is in a completely different area, all of us will enjoy whatever Rich has to say on the subject. I'll briefly introduce Rich. My introduction to Rich was through an acronym that he had devised, or he has devised, BOYD, void, that is BYOD, that's bring your own device, which is a take on verb, that is bring your own booze or bottle or whatever. So whatever he does in the laboratory where he teaches students all kinds of things in the media lab, he actually designs it, and one of the strategies he uses, this is an entirely original idea, is bring your own device. The lab in his university, the lab that he has set up, it embodies a bring your own device philosophy, encouraging a user experience that generates a third space or an understanding of how to best communicate using technological literacy approaches both in and outside the lab. So this is one of the many other things, but I find this extraordinarily interesting and very useful. We have been talking about technology in Delhi University, but I think we have light years to go, where his lab is. He is an associate professor of English at Texas Tech. He teaches face-to-face, hybrid and distance learning courses in the Technical Communication and Rhetoric program, which is one of the top technical communication programs in the world. Specifically, he teaches courses in classical rhetoric, new media, grant writing, interaction design, intercultural communication, and the history and theory of college composition and writing. I wish we had facilities and expertise half as good as this in our colleges and in the Department of English. We have already looked at some of his other works. He's a PhD in English from Ball State University in 2002. He had specialized in composition and rhetoric pedagogy, something that he has been teaching. He has a large number of publications in the form of books and articles. Today he is going to talk about new media translocal communication practices. He uses here principles of software design to translocal communication practices. This is truly a interdisciplinary and cutting-edge field that he's interested in, and we are all curious to find out what exactly all this is about. So, Rich.
Thank you. Thanks, Sumanyu. Thanks, Rizio. Thanks, Kanika. Kanika is sort of my cultural translator. Everything that I see and get wrong, she explains why I'm wrong. So it's very nice to have that. So happy Teachers Day. Today is Teachers Day, so I thought I would frame my talk in terms of my teaching. I have the pleasure of being a researcher of teaching practices. So I get the opportunity to really talk about my own work, and what's useful about that is you can pull the wool over a lot of people's eyes, because you can say, well, this is research, but it's just really what I did last week. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about what I did last week and what I plan to do in the future. I wanted to start off by sharing with you 3 classes that I teach. The class that I'm teaching right now is, of course, in grant writing. And 3 of the most important things in grant writing is really a technical communication modality. It is, in TechCom, you are a bridge. You're a bridge between those who have information, like, say, engineers, and those who need it, like consumers or users of those products. But you often need people who explain, who translate, who bridge the gap between those two. Grant writing is just that thing. And so there are 3 different important things in grant writing that I want to share. You can hit the slide for me, please. Okay, good. There are 3 different kinds of things in grant writing that are important in my talk for us to think about. One is always think about audience. Whenever we write, we always must think about audience. Who is our audience in society? Who is our audience in what we're reading? The second is matching the needs of the users, who may be a funder, with the needs of whoever has a problem. So trying to figure out how to bridge those 2 things. This is a very important principle that I want you to keep in mind as I talk. And the third is pointing out that it's necessary to fund something, but you need to fund it right now. A lot of times you'll write a grant and they'll say, this is a fabulous idea, but we'll fund it next year because we have a lot of things on our plate. So you have to point out, this is important to do right now. That concept of right now is really important. In fact, I teach another course, which I'm teaching in next semester, called Classical Rhetoric. 3 most important things from that course to keep in mind. One is kairos. Kairos is a Greek term that means saying just the right thing in just the right amount at just the right time, right? So that's a core principle of my talk today, of LILA, I think, in general. Another concept is stasis. Stasis is a Roman concept that really means a place to argue, right? One of the problems in my English department is that everybody is always right. You know, we have 55 faculty in TechCom, or in English at the Department of English in Texas Tech. We argue all the time, and everybody's always right. This is because we're never arguing the same thing, right? I argue one thing and somebody else, and there's no commonplace. There's no common ground. Common ground is what is known as stasis. So figuring out ways to create stasis and sustain it is important in making action and change today. So pay attention to that concept as well. And then the third one is an Aristotelian concept of invention called inventio. Now, invention today is a little bit different than the classical sense of inventio. Invention today is a means of discovering something new. And there's a role for that. But you know, Aristotle believed that everything that was discoverable had already been discovered. So he created a massive classification system. Today we have the internet. That's sort of like his sense of classification. So invention is really more of a matter of selection. It's a matter of knowing what to pick and choose, what to say, when to say it, how much to say it in, how to create stasis. So inventio is really a matter of selection. So those are core concepts in my talk today. And then there's a third class that I thought I would talk about to give myself a little bit of ethos. I had the opportunity to teach at the Central University of Kerala, a new Central University, and I taught a course called Writing for Life. And I need to move faster, so I'm not going to read you the bio, but Writing for Life is a course that simply says we need to make sense of our world through action. And one of those ways is to document, to write things down, to use writing to create life. Another core principle, I think, of LILA. So those are some of the things that are useful in thinking about what I'm going to say. And I also want to point out that in reflecting about this talk, it boiled down to one major concept for me. And I'm very interested in seeing if I'm right or if Kanika needs to set me straight, which is this. You know, the problem that I see with intercultural communication and competency has a lot to do with networking. That we are excellent today at networking. In fact, there's no better group of people who can network than people in India. But you can have networks without connections, right? You can really use technology in great ways, but connecting with people is somewhat difficult, right? So what I'm trying to get at with this talk is really maybe a way to understand how to better connect with people through some of the things that we do well already in society. And some of those things include software design. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. All right, so these are some of the concepts that I'm going to relate to throughout the talk. It's complicated. It's complex. It's hard. Very hard. Yeah. And that's the way it should be. Workable solutions for communication problems in global societies come from flexible approaches. Such solutions require a high level of intercultural competence in order to listen, reason, and debate productively. New slide. Spend a few minutes here reviewing recent news media with translocal transactional rhetoric in mind to examine such complexity. We must assume people are in some way connected through communication tools, that we are sender-receivers rather than merely senders, and that we must work to achieve stasis, or shared recognition of cultural disjuncture or hegemonic forces through a productive level of intercultural competence. As an example, consider a recent debate between Pakistani young girls about nuclear proliferation, and I read this and I gasped, where they talk about Indian aggression, and they're teaching Pakistani young girls about Indian aggression. Certainly some further understanding of cultural difference, such as characteristics of self-restraint, is necessary in order to more fully understand cross-cultural positioning. Or consider an interfaith dialogue of the Global Future 2045 Congress regarding human problems such as the militarization of neuroscience as weaponry, when religion becomes ideology, arguing for the disarmament of 3 weapons of mass destruction: poverty, fear, and hate. Some level of understanding related to uncertainty avoidance differences across cultures and organizations could aid that conversation. Or consider Obama's Sing 21st Century Knowledge Initiative grant project, a project I've tried 2 times to win a grant from and have failed. Designed to strengthen collaboration and build partnerships in order to foster mutual understanding, facilitate educational reform, and strengthen civil society without threatening cultural identity. One hurdle with the initiative is in understanding how diverse the definition of civil society is due to power distance differences. This is one of the reasons I'm trying to immerse myself in cultures of India in different ways to really understand these differences. Finally, consider a recent article outlining former U.S. Department of Justice official John Hughes' views. He is known for his legal justification of President George W. Bush's enhanced interrogation techniques. During a recent U.S. House Judiciary Committee meeting, he testified in support of President Obama's approach to the use of drones on targeted killings. Okay, now this is something very difficult to understand from an intercultural perspective. I don't believe I'm smart enough to begin to debate issues related to Syria right now, so I will stay away from that. But this is one colossal intercultural communication problem that greater competency would help with. Many cultural differences complicate accepting or agreeing with U.S. policies worldwide. In the book Power Politics, Arundhati Roy points out, and I quote, "The issue is not about good versus evil, or Islam versus Christianity, or much as it is about space. About how to accommodate diversity, how to contain the impulse toward hegemony, every kind of hegemony, economic, military, linguistic, religious, and cultural." Similarly, in my discipline, Gerald Savage and Han Yu and Techcom in their book, Negotiating Cultural Encounters, present workplace case studies involving issues of diversity in global style guide creation. Imagine the difficulty of using English across the world, say, but then writing English with some consistency in manuals or in policies or in case law. Other case studies include problems transferring technical knowledge across multicultural organizations, problems seeking excellence in cross-cultural communication rather than just removing ambiguity, problems analyzing if documentation from one culture can be translated with adequate cultural understanding to other cultures, and problems related to English language instruction in many countries. Indeed, sustained solutions for citizenry today require complex transactional exchanges that require significant translocal intercultural competence. And now I want to turn to where I'm from. I'm from Texas. Yes, this is where President George W. Bush is also from. And so I want to point out everything we do wrong from Texas, which is a lot. Beginning with this. We say that everything is bigger in Texas. We say don't mess with Texas. That's really more of a a garbage kind of issue, you know, don't mess Texas, but it's a kind of a funny pun. We in Texas sometimes even say that we are a country unto ourselves. I hear my colleagues say that. Texas is so big, it's a country. But globalization and the increasing ubiquity of immediate communication through technological affordances have made Texas a much smaller place. Rather than landmass a priority, influence in a global economy today depends more on strategic communication and fair trade. We should teach we are not by ourselves, that people should mess with us, and vice versa, and that ultimately we are not that big at all. That's what we should be teaching in Texas. Students in my classes, in other words, must learn how to negotiate understanding the vibrant rhythms of culturally diverse and socially complex global content. Resources in global society must be shared in order to be valuable. As intercultural communication researchers argue, quote, the citizens of the 21st century must learn to see through the eyes, hearts, and minds of people from cultures other than their own. And such researchers further suggest that, quote, in order to live meaningfully and productively in the world, individuals must develop their intercultural communication competence. Thus, intercultural competence should be a primary skill of Texan global citizens, as well as Indian global citizens, as we live in a world today which values local and global knowledge mashing. What we teach should embrace the interconnectedness necessary of people and cultures across the world to improve decision making. Right now, the concept of globalization is often defined as globally dispensed products or ideas designed to accommodate users in local markets. It's a term that really comes from, as I've been researching it, and my wife again tells me I'm wrong all the time. It's a term that comes from the 1970s from the Japanese as they were beginning to market globally their products across the world. So the term is really often defined in light of selling you something. There is definitely an economic connection to it. However, global thinking, beyond just selling product through creativity, can work to maximize productive dialectical exchange and can support the development of intercultural communication competence. Slide. All right, now I'm enamored with this dude named Sir Ken Robinson. Has anybody seen him on YouTube or other videos? There's a number of fabulous videos. He's an educational thinker, and in his work on ways in which schools disable creativity, he points out the dire need for diverse educational systems across the world to reform education with this divergent learning approach in mind. Okay, I'm going to read it because it's important. Every country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. I just got back from a trip doing the Triangle. Every 5 minutes we passed a new university going up. It's remarkable how much money is being put into new universities in this country. There are two reasons for this. The first is economic. People are trying to work out how do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century. The second, though, is cultural. Every country on earth is trying to figure out how do we educate our children so that they have a sense of cultural identity, so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities. While being part of the process of globalization, how do you square that circle? The problem is that they're trying to meet the future by doing what they did in the past. And that the way, and on the way, they're alienating millions of kids who don't see any purpose in going to school. When we went to school, we were kept there with a story, which is, if you worked hard, you did well and got a college degree, and you'd have a good job. So Ken Robinson is suggesting we come up with new models of approaching everything we do. We must prepare professional communicators, and I think all students need to become professional communicators, to work with people with diverse backgrounds and interests in digital networks, redefining themselves in light of others, expanding their understanding of citizenship in various communities, requiring emerging global policies and highly politicized local realities with increasingly complex stakeholder interests. slide. So how do we begin to do this? There are a number of people that have begun to categorize different cultural differences, and that's the first thing we have to do, is understand difference. Has anybody heard of Hofstede? Hofstede is a major organizational theorist, again from the 1970s, who has done hundreds of thousands of surveys. He worked with IBM and surveyed everybody in multinational IBM and looked at different cultural traits of different employees across the world. We can use tools like Hofstede's cultural value dimensions to make sense of such differences, such as dimensions of collectivism and individualism, masculine and feminine, uncertainty avoidance, power distance, indulgent versus self-restraint, and structural characteristics. We all fit somewhere within these dimensions. So what he suggests is, based upon your culture, you are likely to communicate with specific characteristics along these heuristics. Hofstede goes further, though, and this is brilliant. There's another main point. If you're dozing off in any of my talk, this is one to wake up for. Hofstede calls culture software of the mind. Okay, software of the mind. In fact, pointing out that we change how we think, feel, and behave toward others as we understand difference in more in-depth ways. Our software is being updated all the time. Our culture is in constant flux, a sort of growing neighborhood of understanding and recognition. Slide. Aperturi relates this flux as ever-changing fluidity, and that we create our imagined neighborhoods in these spaces based upon who we interact with, both physically and virtually. People keep asking me, well, you know a lot about India now, right? Well, I've been 3 times to India, so yeah, I know everything. And they say, well, what's Indian culture like? And I can't answer them. It's very difficult. Indian culture is so diverse, but it's also it's ever changing. It depends on which day of the week you're asking. And so this is a notion that is significant, that we need to understand culture, not in a way that, say, Hofstede will put a dot on a map and say, you're here, well, your culture is this. But instead, something more like what Aperturi is suggesting, that is very flexible. Aperturi uses these notions of scapes, like a seascape, flowing in and out. And as such, culture moves in with ebbs and flows. Aperturi's dimensions are flexible, pattern-making trajectories, including ethnoscapes, mediascapes, technoscapes, financescapes, ideascapes. And they're all based on similarities, affinities, and differences that we may have with each other, not necessarily your location. Recognizing difference is the first step in improving intercultural competence in translocal, newly mediated societies. Seeing difference is critical in productive workplaces, effective educational systems, and as global citizens. And our graduating students are increasingly expected to work in these transnational teams with diverse colleagues and clients, which require complex intercultural procedures and policies and approaches. So you're beginning to see we can be excellent networkers. We can understand different cultural differences, but that's not enough. We have to communicate as well. We have to connect, right? There are many obstacles where I'm from, in Texas and in India, preventing faculty from setting up useful classroom models which can support this kind of connection structure. Some intercultural distance learning specialists, for instance, have developed some solutions, and I'd like to share a few of those. Some suggest that in collaborating with their increasingly diverse colleagues, technical communicators, and I think we can all become technical communicators, must be able to build shared virtual team spaces, exploring and weaving together a diverse range of local culture, linguistic, organizational, and professional contexts in ways and in different ways that allow for developing trusting relationships for sharing knowledge across different kinds of boundaries. All right. So again, it's not enough to network; we have to connect. Hit me with 3 slides, maybe 10 seconds apart. So these are some of my students. Again, this talk is about translocal, so I should show you some things about Texas. I'm working with an agency called ELS, the English Language Services Center, which is a center that is across America in different states. And universities have found that the complexity of working with different cultures in their institutions, a lot of them Indian cultures coming to America, we are not prepared for it. We cannot do it justice. And so ELS has come in, and universities are outsourcing some of their students who need to understand differences between cultures to these locations that are outside the university, serving as a bridge to the university. It's so complex. And so this is, these are some of my students working with some of those students. All right, well, Sumanyu said I was going to talk about software, so I got to get to that. Let's flip into some interesting concepts in software that I think can help us see how to begin to do this in better ways. And this is very interdisciplinary. Intercultural communication competence instruction models, ways to do what I'm trying to get at, can be improved to generate dynamic performance support by examining ways in which application frameworks, which are computer programs, are created for evolving software systems. Now, there are two components to all of these software systems. There's the design component and there's the coding component. There's an interface and then there's what's behind the interface. Design often includes creating ideas and assignments. I'm trying to make metaphorical connections. Coding includes methods of presenting, responding, assessing, and supporting. Connecting effective design and coding approaches to intercultural communication practices, ultimately both inside and outside of the classroom, is what I want you to really make a connection to today. Slide. Okay. There we go. The practice of software design itself has long followed what's called the code and fix methodology, building programs or websites on successive, layered, quick decisions. If the computer and project application is small, the approach works quite well. Code and fix is a way to get moving on a project. But as systems grow, new features or better approaches invariably become more challenging to implement. Bugs abound until they are fixed in long testing phases, taxing human resources and frustrating users. If the fix is too time-consuming, bugs might simply be reasoned features of the system. Have you heard that before? If it's not a bug, then it must be a feature. Right? I don't know how to fix this. Well, I meant to do this. Right? We see this a lot in software design. Considering the creation of a plan for faculty development in online writing instructions, say, I know Sumanyu and others are involved in a lot of work now working with students at a distance. Most departments in the US have used this code and fix methodology to create online systems like these, or even hybrid systems, which may part face-to-face and part online. And it kind of works. You know, ask faculty to teach a few courses, see what students think, see what outcomes are met readily and which need more attention, work to improve those courses, create additional courses, and then offer everyone occasional workshops, one-on-one support maybe with a tech-savvy guy or a geek. I'm often that guy, you know. Have somebody come and fix the problem. So code it, fix it, you know, pick up the pieces, redo it. Now, this approach may work to get started, but to sustain faculty development in more meaningful ways, more is needed. Programs evolve. Some programs may survey faculty and students to prioritize fixing of these kinds of problems, perhaps even creating knowledge bases, FAQs, solutions, sets of solutions. They may ask, you know, ways in which online teaching can enhance pedagogy, such as improving student participation in activities and exercises and discussion, improving student performance on papers and exams, encouraging faculty to rethink educational approaches and organization overall, giving students greater access to courses in terms of flexibility in time and location, or documenting records of interactions between faculty and students more. These are very typical movements towards sustaining online programs or any program in an educational context. At the root of these questions in programmatic development is access. When I was at the Central University Kerala, one of my students is in the back there opening the door. I was really surprised at the level of access that students had. Of course, the power goes out a lot, and so there are issues with connectivity. But you know, the women of the school had to go back to their dorms a little bit earlier than the men did. Well, they didn't have internet in the dorms. So in effect, the men were getting an unfair advantage. They had access to information online longer every day than women did, right? So the first thing that we did was we focused on access, and we worked to get internet in the dorms. And that becomes the number one problem that we see with this kind of code and fix modality, is that there are structural constraints. And usually that constraint is access. Code and fix methodology may not always provide universal access. It does enable us to see what we do not see prior to a course being taught, prior to a course being assessed. Still, you know, this does make sense. There's a short-term demand to fill, so hire and train teachers to construct courses and teach online, teach face-to-face, building tools along the way, perhaps calling the courses betas or pilots, fixing problems through implementation. Once courses are going, copy and paste those additional instances or sections, and then hire more instructors and let them teach the course. You can see the logic of this code and fix methodology working out in how most universities get started. A few years down the road, important systematic or strategic bugs will invariably arise. What are some of the benefits that better, more systematized design models should work towards improving? Benefits which code and fix approaches tend to under-support. Okay, so I listed 3 different kinds of software design approaches. Code and fix is the first. Consider the value of innovative teaching strategies which are not recognized by those in authority and institutions as worthy of productive effort in promotion cases. This gets lost in code and fix. We don't care, we're just going to fix it and move on. If teaching online can create greater time and location flexibility, consider strategies a department can use in support or incentivizing faculty to help maximize opportunities like conference travel, extended research trips, study abroad work, interdisciplinary and interinstitutional teaching. These are all things that we can begin to do if we slip into the next level of software design conceptually. The goal here in this next level is to plan testing and recoding cycles with version updates that are engineered by teams of designers, programmers, and usability testers. It's called predictive software design. This is what we're most familiar with. Hey, did you hear Microsoft Office is coming out with a new update, right? It's scheduled and it's going to have X, Y, and Z updates. So instead of code and fix, fixing when it's needed, scheduling those fixes periodically. Predictive software design. Predicting the direction software should take based on evolving user needs can also be limiting, however. Software, modality, content, access, and other requirements change constantly in online writing instruction or any form of writing instruction. Design requires much creativity, and prediction is difficult as coding or content construction typically follows design. Design comes first, I know what I want, and then now you got to hire somebody to program what you want. This is predictive design, which affords some flexibility for constructing long-term planned development. Consider growing a selection of courses while planning to upgrade their goals and objectives alongside those of other kinds of courses. All right, so I've had some wonderful conversations with different institutions that are just getting started here. And they are using so far both of these types of approaches. You know, get started and then fix problems once you see them. Have you ever seen, buildings constructed? We talk a lot about this in America, where you have some construction workers who want to build sidewalks and paths in different places to get from point A to point B. The smarter way of doing it is to wait a few years and let people carve out the paths themselves and then put concrete in those places, right? Certainly that's the case with everywhere you walk in India. There are roads, and then there are other roads, right? And then there are other pathways. Well, another way of figuring out, that's the difference between code and fix and predictive, is code and fix might try to carve out a pathway in one area, but then fix it as needed. It costs a lot of time and money to fix it, and I may not be able to do that for another decade. But predictive might make some connections between things ahead of time, and it may take 5 years, but it will be done better, right? In some ways. And so these are two different types of philosophies of designing curriculum, designing spaces that I've been seeing. Okay, I want to get to the third one, because this is what really gets me very excited. What if the design stage, remember there's design and there's coding, what if the design stage could include the coding, that you coded as you designed? That is, what if in designing and in redesigning courses, we code and construct content simultaneously, revising and revamping as we use feedback loops to reflect the teachers, students, and assessment measurement requirements. I know this isn't really the norm for how courses are created in India. I know there's massive reliability and validity that is designed across universities and colleges that is very impressive. The US has a much different kind of system where it's much more individualized. So this is a tough metaphor to tie. But many software programmers develop code connecting design and construction using this third methodology called agile software design. The approach is more adaptive than predictive and more people-oriented than process-oriented. They offer feedback mechanisms at frequent intervals to mitigate the impact of radical change. Requirements always change, and I think we should be surprised at people who think that is surprising, right? Agile software design uses what is called iterative refactoring. And this is a concept that also serves as a useful metaphor for LILA and what we're doing, iterative refactoring. Specifically, code refactoring is a systematic approach to restructuring computer code which alters internal structures without changing external behaviors in order to improve the code's readability, reducing the code's complexity, improving the maintainability, refining the internal architecture to improve sustainability and future accessibility. Refactoring makes it easier to fix bugs, and the programmers or authors who follow redesigning and recoding can more readily contextualize and shape the code, called a third space. Sumanyu mentioned I'm interested in this concept called third spaces. So I'm going to skip some things. Hit me with another slide, please. Okay. These are some related concepts to programming that it comes from a book called The Pragmatic Programmer that allows us to identify how to create some of these spaces. So instead of a physical environment, instead of a fully online environment, why not teach students and communicate with people how to share these spaces, how to communicate with people in both environments. You think of this in terms of education, but also in terms of culture. This is the translocal. So bringing together different kinds of spaces, seeing my space in Texas as one space, your space here in India as another, and let's work in both spaces simultaneously, not in one or the other, right? That's the concept. So these are some of the types of things programmers talk about, but you can look at those and think about those in terms of effective communication with others. Another one of my heroes, his name's Manuel Castells, and in addition to researching differences impacted by age and gender and ethnicity and socioeconomic status, he identifies the translocalizing work of intercultural communication competence with another complication to this, but it's also, again, all bugs are sort of features. Increasingly, the use of mobile tools creates a merging of the public and the private, or the workplace and the personal, or the curricular and the co-curricular. Castells and others, they discuss this as a sort of full-time intimate community, specifically because of the increasingly ubiquitous global diffusion of mobile communication. Staying in touch anytime and anywhere becomes a cultural hybridity that we should explore in terms of intercultural competence. Sustained engagement, and thus an increase in cultural competence through transactional rhetoric, is possible with mobile connectivity in ways that computer-mediated communication can't do. Because you can carry around a mobile device with you, it becomes part of your identity, who you are. It becomes your culture. And it's not a culture that replaces other culture, but it is your new culture. But it carries with it a technological affordance that allows you to communicate with such ease and quickness, and sharing your culture in such ways that it creates a sort of slippage, an environmental slippage between a translocal slippage between your identity and somebody else's identity. So using tools to bridge that gap, that sort of technical tools, technical communicator. Okay. I thought I would share with you a couple of things that some of my students have written to help identify some of these issues and maybe point out to you the significance in terms of intercultural communication competence. Slide. One student, his name's Chase, and Chase said that learning about a new culture shouldn't make the learner replace his old culture and his old cultural profile with new information. Instead, the new information in an ideal learning exchange leaves both cultures' nativeness intact, supplemented with new knowledge. It was not the Japanese version of localization. I'm here to sell you something, and I really don't care about transmitting my own culture. I'm here to sell you something within your own culture. It's about truly transactionally sharing both cultures simultaneously. And it's not a replacement model. Another slide. One of my students, David, wrote this: all too often, and perhaps even in my own thinking, we mistake diversity appreciation for intercultural competence. Again, when people are asking me, well, what is an Indian culture like? They're thinking diversity. They're not thinking intercultural competence. And so it's very difficult for me to say exactly what an Indian is like. I have to look at very specific people and say, well, this person's like this, and this person's like this, and we have a multitude of cultures. This is not to diminish the value of diversity, however. As technical communicators, we need to understand that true intercultural competence goes beyond appreciation. Effective intercultural communication must engage the boundaries and margins and find the context that forms a discourse between people of various cultures. And those discourse communities become neighborhoods, become shared third spaces, a multitude of intercultural communication competency spaces. Next slide. Another student of mine, Amelia, wrote this. One of the ways culture can be defined, as Hofstede puts it, is collective programming of the minds. And when I mentioned software of the mind, the problem with the term programming is it suggests that somebody is brainwashing you, right? But the point of this is to become our own software programmers, to determine what we need to know about other cultures simultaneously. Such a metaphor implies that outside social and cultural forces are programming the operating system, that no single individual of a particular culture can escape such a programmatic experience. Changes in that culture can only mutate slowly over time, and usually without present conscious awareness. This becomes the issue. Remember, I started off by saying with grant writing, one of the most important things is, yeah, you need to fund me, and you need to fund me right now, because the issue is important right now. Okay, that's one of the things with Kairos as well, that you need to say the most important thing at the most important time in just the right amount. We do need to affect significant changes in our local communities and our world. We need to do it right now. It's important to see how to bring this agile software design, these iterative refactoring processes to the thinking of right now. This software of the mind has led me to think about the nature of communication processes which form cultural understanding or misunderstanding, and more than anything, the delay and changing of understanding difference. Like the process of revision itself, with writing we need quick changes based on audience reflection, that's the user experience, based on the need to come to places to disagree or create stasis. Disagreement is great. We need to unravel disagreement. What's problematic is when people don't bother to disagree. You know? When they come together and they say, I'm right, you're wrong. Instead, we need stasis. We need places, spaces where people can mutually understand each other's cultures in order to create disagreement and hegemony. New knowledge with intercultural awareness and understanding of difference does not replace what is already familiar. Instead, we need to practice a pedagogy of inclusivity to embrace the need for converging divergences. We need to recognize that context is everything, and context is always changing. We should try to learn the programmatic language of the operating systems of cultures. The concerns of the global should not replace those of the local. Intercultural competence goes beyond appreciation for diversity, and there are stages of development in this process that you will find these familiar. First is denial. You know, you'll work with somebody and find, I just don't understand that person. That person is off whack, right? You deny their culture. But then there's a sense of defensiveness. Maybe it's me. Maybe I smell, and that person's great, right? And then you minimize the difference. And you know, we're not really that different at all. We have these underlying beliefs that are the same. And finally, you accept the difference, and you adapt to it, and then you integrate it, right? So it's this notion of integrating difference that we need to work towards in translocal communication. Globalization has built bridges between cultures, but we should move beyond convenience or efficiency in bringing together the local and the global. Intercultural communication competence is a collective consciousness. It is globalization, but it's always already translocal. It's not again the Japanese version of I'm going to sell you something one-dimensional, one-directional. It is adding new understanding to the familiar without disrupting what is known to be better, both the local and the global. It is recognizing difference, but not in a superficial way, like how big one group is, we're huge in Texas in terms of land mass, or how tough one neighborhood is, or even how separatist one's policies seem to be. An iterative agile framework for communication in order to develop intercultural competence without breaking out of stasis is needed to support and then recognize the work that is required to create rigorous thought spaces for students. Motivating faculty in development, action, and then what we call action to results. Work to progress toward characteristics of more adaptive and agile, people-oriented professional performance support system models and frameworks. That should be the goal of LILA and what we try to accomplish. Work to meet instructional, faculty, institutional, research, and overarching best practice through iterative refactoring in order to develop a more flexible allocation of time and talent in order to build a healthy digital economy and world of citizens, a global world of citizens. Okay, that's it for me. Slide. Great. Questions?
Thank you, Rich, for a very rich talk on translocal communication, taking a cue from Abadurai's idea about how culture is the software of the mind. Rich goes on to talk about how best the software techniques can be used for such translocal communications or translocal transactions. Thank you very much. And now, Florido, any questions, interventions?
Thanks, Rich, for that talk. It was very interesting to hear you and hear your ideas about the translocal and intercultural competence. If culture is the software, I'm curious to know, if we develop that metaphor, what the hardware is. And one term, I'm not faulting you for this, but one term that I didn't hear as you were talking about globalization was capitalism. Now, to what extent is the demand for intercultural competence outside or inside capitalism? And to what extent is capitalism a hardware that demands a software of intercultural competence? How do we need agile software that might put pressure on the hardware that is demanding that software in the first place?
Yeah, brilliant questions, Gil. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Ideological forces are the hardware, and oftentimes we're very much constrained by that. I think what we're seeing, though, if we extend the metaphor to mobile computing as well, we're seeing a lot of different kinds of democracies, a lot of different approaches to information sharing and movement between cultures. And to me, that's sort of symbolic of everybody has the internet in their pocket. Everybody has access to provide their input. There's a brilliant woman named Sherry Graydon who came up with a term about 15 years ago now called the romantic social epistemic. And the concept is bringing together hardware and software together. The romantic notion of individualism is one that can be seen with democracy in a way, can be seen with capitalism in a way, pushing the individual but within constraints. But the social epistemic is how we make knowledge today. We make knowledge today through transaction. So if the romantic version, the ideology of the individual is what we want to work towards, but then recognizing that we are all part of a culture that works together and bridges these two things, then you realize that you're right. I mean, you can't have hardware without software. You can't have software without hardware. But then we can more portably move these ideas around. We can bring them together and use different devices to enact the movement between software and hardware in different ways. I think it's a really good metaphor, software versus hardware. Yeah.
Thank you, Rich, for a very engaging talk. This is about transcoding that you mentioned. I was thinking about, a place like India, which is very, very complex and varied in various ways. Like when you're saying a certain technology is going to kind of modify a certain culture and vice versa. So how do you look at this kind of a thing happening in a space like India? Like for instance, like 100 kilometers from a place like Delhi, you have an entirely different kind of access to technology, or everything is different. Like you go to UP or Haryana, anywhere. This is a kind of variety and kind of gaps that we have in the country like India. So in terms of technology and this particular issue of how the culture is going to be modified, or technology is, culture is going to modify technology. So how do you see this happening in a place like India?
Yeah, great question. Well, of course, I'm an outsider looking in, and so take my views with a grain of salt. One approach is to look at where India was, say, in 1960, and how different life in India is today because of globalization, because of technology. And of course, technology hasn't reached every corner of India in the same way. That's one way of looking at the impact of technology in terms of transcoding. But there are concepts that are related to what technology does in terms of crowdsourcing, say, that makes a change on the culture even if they don't have access to that technology. I mentioned access is where you end up going in a code and fix kind of methodological approach. So code and fix here is, let me give you a cell phone and then see how you use it. But not everybody can have that cell phone, so I got to fix that problem. That problem's going to take a long time to fix for everybody. Information access is going to take a long time to fix for everybody. Other ways of doing that would be to plan fixes along the way. So we're going to bring that technology every 5 years to different locations in India. Or an even better way would be an agile software methodology where you're constantly on the case of trying to figure out how I can bring that technology to a group. But what I'm interested in too is sort of how society changes. We have somebody from the Times of India here, and I'm very interested in how newspapers have changed over, say, the last 5 years. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the notion of a blog was pretty foreign. But now blogs are seen as legitimate narrative spaces that people can provide ethos in. We used to tell our students, well, you got to go to the library. You can't look online for these things. You got to go to the library to look up definitive sources. The definitive source has changed. It has become the source who has an eye on it. That is backed up by 30 other people who have their eyes on it, right? That's an epistemological shift caused by technology in Indian culture and in my culture that doesn't really matter if you have the technology anymore. That we don't necessarily trust the traditionally definitive locations or sites in the same way. And so technology is affecting culture in that way. There's so much work to do though. When you think about women who are coming to the city and have much different cultural backgrounds, and people who don't understand those women and don't understand their needs or who they are, these are huge cultural misunderstandings that we need to work on, maybe by constantly bringing to light what those differences are. I think the problem again comes down to not recognizing that there's a significant difference, right? But yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys about what you think, because this is information I don't know about, how technology has changed different aspects of Indian society.
I'm not going to answer that question, which I think is a wonderful question. People who know more about that than I can do that. I just want to sort of push you a little bit on the notion of difference, because it's the buzzword, right? In studies of different cultures, sort of sensitizing people to differences between cultures. I have always maintained that difference is overrated. That I think there's a lot more value to think about sameness, and to think about what there is that might connect people. And it seems to me what you're talking about, technology, is one of those things very powerfully. So why do you think we still go on about differences? I mean, isn't it an old episteme, to quote you as well, isn't it an episteme that in fact has given rise to far more tensions and far more wars and conflicts in the world than taking seriously the idea of sameness?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I rely a lot on Proto-Rye. So we start with one sort of methodology, code and fix, that says, hey, there's a difference and I can fix it. And you're absolutely right, that is dangerous. It's a very difficult thing to do if you stop there. But if you move to something that's more transactional, and you say, I'm going to move through these layers of understanding how to move beyond difference to acceptance, to integration, right? Then you can use sort of an agile software design approach, mentality, that kind of thing of, I'm going to constantly be on it. I'm going to keep working on it and fixing it, not destroying my communication with this other culture and these differences along the side, but keep working on understanding difference so that I can move towards acculturation and integration and sameness. So perhaps I didn't articulate it as well as possible, but we need to move from difference into accepting, understanding of sameness. Yeah. So Proto-Rye does it much better in terms of understanding neighborhoods and this idea of flexibility and that everything is constantly changing. And so creating a mentality of looking at trying to be interculturally competent and recognizing that competency is constant change, is acceptance of sameness, acceptance of difference as you understand as it moves towards sameness, because we all become global citizens, right?
I think I have a slightly different take on this. I believe that talks of sameness would generally come from the elite in each of the identity groups, and I feel that the whole attempt at translocal communications somehow undermines the value of identity politics. In India, for example, if we are talking about the Dalits, they would rather maintain this issue of difference rather than identifying themselves with sameness. So I think whereas in the era of globalization, this is desirable, understanding each other's cultures and getting near to each other. Yet there are certain underprivileged groups which insist on identity politics, and taking this idea to its extreme. Logic might, not from my point of view, but from the point of view of these who are struggling on the basis of identity in order to maintain their identity, where they feel that they are safer as long as their identity is protected. So they are not the ones who would be easily amenable to the idea of translocal communications. This is what I feel. What's your take on that?
I agree.
I disagree actually, so if I could just add to that. I don't think the language of the elite is sameness. I think the language of the elite is difference. The entire politics of caste in India is about difference. It's not about sameness at all. And if you're talking about any kind of oppression, it's always about us and them. You are not us, and we are not you, and you cannot enter our club. In fact, the language of sameness is very, very much more radical than that. If you're saying that, marginalized groups want to accept identity politics as the politics of difference, they're just being co-opted into a game that they have always been made to lose. And I find it particularly sad that they have been co-opted in that game, because I think they have always been at the receiving end, or at the short end of that stick. And so sameness to me seems a much more radical idea. I don't think it's about erasing anyone's individuality or particularity. It is in fact refusing to play the kind of caste politics, if that's how you want to look at it, that we in this country have been hugely beset by. I mean, the reason why, say, religions like Islam and Christianity were so appealing to lower caste Hindus and Buddhism is because it got rid of a certain kind of difference. And I think we need to take that much more seriously. Paying lip service to the idea of difference, I mean, I hate to say this, it's an extremely American idea. It's a very capitalistic idea. It's all about brand differences. It's all about saying, I have this little thing that you don't have. Whereas sameness is actually much more amenable to a certain kind of swirl that doesn't differentiate one strand from the other and then police that.
I think the binaries of difference and sameness are dangerous to use by themselves. Instead, finding these spaces where we have differences and we have sameness, we have similarities and we have differences. And these are unique spaces in between different cultures. And then exploring what all of those are. And to say it's okay to have these differences and it's great to have these things that are similar. But to suggest that there are these complete binaries, we are either different or we are same, that's where we get into trouble.
Can I add to this? The moment we say translocal, there is we are privileging the transitory path. It's not really, you're not saying it's different from the word local, which is like kind of yocking together two different ideas, and it's there and achieved. It's a kind of arrived at idea. But translocal is that term which will help you to trace the path of how do you cross from here to there, and even as you cross, you at each point you see how it's a kind of conscious process. You understand why. In our organization is called Foundation for Translocal Initiatives, because we think it is important for us. Anyway, the world is becoming, because of communication facilities, etc., it's becoming smaller and smaller. And there is, it would be very dangerous if you, talk about differences too much now, because it's not going to help us. And very peripherally, very superficially, if we talk about sameness also, it becomes a problem. So there has to be a kind of competence, as Rich would use the word, which is different from a kind of campaigning for awareness and general awareness, etc. There's a methodology that you will have to develop in order to move from this to that. So each step, it's a conscious process. So I think our educational system, our educational institutions have to develop a certain methodology to move from one to the other. So, and that cross-border experience is very, very important.
Any other questions?
I think perhaps, Rich, you might want to connect this to technology. I'm thinking of the EXO computers that we were encouraged to buy. If you remember, buy a computer and then one is donated to a child in Africa. How that model failed or succeeded. And then the Akash tablet, which, $35 tablet, not very technologically savvy, but again, it's the code and fixed model which is being used by the Indian government, right? To put a tablet in the hand of every citizen, every child, right? Again, playing on the notion of sameness and difference again, right? Well, electricity in Africa or in parts of Asia is a problem, so we are going to provide solar-powered computers to children in Africa, which was the EXO model, right? And then tablets by Samsung or by other multinational corporations are too expensive for Indians or people in other parts of the world to buy, so the Indian government comes up and comes up with a cheaper model of the tablet. So technologically, I think the notion of sameness and difference has been appropriated by various corporations, but also by the governments of various countries. Perhaps it's an electoral ploy, perhaps it's genuine, hard to determine what it is. But in terms of technology, this notion of sameness and difference is playing out in very different ways and across various models of software and communication design. Because EXO was, I remember, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and Akash is a much recent development. So perhaps you would like to comment on that.
Well, both of those projects, to me, at the root of their interest in trying to accomplish something was access. And access is access to the technology, but access to communication. We can't achieve stasis. We can't get to that place where we're looking at difference or sameness, sharing our different views, unless we can communicate, right? And so both of those projects were about communication. The EXO laptop, what was most interesting about it is it came with these wireless, what's called a mesh network. These mesh networks which allowed you to connect to the internet. So somebody in the village may be close enough to an internet tower, but most people aren't. But you can get to that internet tower by connecting through this mesh network to it. So you can work together in order to begin to connect. That was sort of the hidden philosophy behind that project. That project failed. It failed because innovation overtook it. The idea was to create a $100 laptop. Well, $100 is too expensive. So the Akash tablet is $38, I believe, the last time I checked, but it doesn't have much power yet. But imagine if we all had, everybody in India did have access to communicate in certain ways. I think that's the primary goal, is to try to get access first, and then we can communicate and look at difference or similarity.
Sir, you have given a very good you have prepared. Hello? No, it's not working. Switch it. Anyway, I can come. You have enlightened us about these communications and this technology. But here great scholars are sitting and everyone is trying to communicate his ideas. This is such a vast topic in globalization and in this period. You have talked of individualism and collectivism also. So this individualism and collectivism differs even, as just now the madam has mentioned, even on caste basis. Muslims, Hindus, Christians. Now, this technology has not been so far successful as far as uniting the entire world. And this technology has also proved to be used for destructive purposes, and majority of the terrorists and also the intelligence agencies, they are also using the same means. So sir, opinions will always differ. Time changes, ideas changes, new inventions, as you said, they keep on going on. So change is the law of nature, and every society is based on its own concepts. Unity utility, everybody, everything depends on the kind of ideology, what kind of ideology you are having. Common interest you have talked, and common interest leads to development and so many things. But we appreciate you have done hard work, we have listened to you very patiently, and we wish you all good luck for future also. Thank you very much.
Rich, do you want to respond to that?
Any other questions? No? Thank you very much.
In fact, this is very engaging discussion, which is really, done radical work in communications thinking. I wish we had more people. This is also a kind of symbolic of like our attitude towards certain kind of topics, certain kind of subjects, etc. Because the moment you have this kind of public, I'm just sharing this with you so we understand this. Like I'm looking at the kind of crowd that we have, and the other days, and I'm trying to understand why this happens. Like such an engaging kind of talk, such an profoundly engaged scholar. Like, why is it that we have, this kind of a crowd? So, suddenly you have this kind of feeling that certain things are too technical, certain things are too, niche, and, it's not for everybody, etc. So, these kind of thinking. So, this series was really conceptualized to bridge these gaps and see how things can be brought together and how each of these things are very important for us. How we have to, if at all we have to think about development, we have to think about this in a very holistic kind of manner, because if you look at the series, like we have been distributing these flyers, and if you look at the series, you find that, we are actually moving, thinking about certain concepts like inclusiveness, certain kind of concepts which are very relevant to a place like India, and trying to see how each of these disciplines looks at it, and how these thoughts can be brought together and taken to a larger audience at different levels.